The smell hit before anything else. Pine disinfectant laid down thick over concrete, and under it, sharper, the bitter musk of 11 dogs stacked in wire crates along the north wall of the Millwood County Grange Hall, their breath fogging the cold morning air. Somewhere behind that came coffee, burnt at the bottom of a percolator nobody had watched. And beneath the barking, rising and falling like a tide against the rafters, one crate rattled harder than the rest, a shepherd throwing its shoulder into the mesh door with a sound like a fist on a drum. What does an old man write on the same yellowed index card 11 years running? And why does he never once raise his hand to bid?
Folks, we don't have all morning for sentimental old-timers to wander around wasting good bidding time, Colton Ashcroft said, loud enough to carry, his pen clicking twice against his clipboard as he said it, eyes cutting toward a stooped figure standing motionless near the crate row in a barn coat the color of creek clay. He was 79 years old. He had come to that hall for the 11th year running. In the next 90 minutes, 11 dogs belonging to 6 different agencies, dogs that had never met him, never trained under the same roof, never so much as shared a transport crate, would turn at the sound of one word from his mouth and go still, all at once, as if a single hand had reached into each of their chests and stopped a clock. Nobody in that room, not the coordinator with his clicking pen, not the consultant with her tablet, not even the old man's own grandson standing 2 feet behind him with a paper cup of hot cocoa going cold in his fist, understood yet what that word was, or why it worked, or what it was going to cost the county before noon. The crowd around Ashcroft laughed, the easy laugh of people who have already decided what kind of morning this is going to be. A woman near the coffee urn shook her head and said something to her neighbor about how sweet it was that some folks still came out for these things. A man in a canvas auction house jacket didn't even look up from his catalog. The old man didn't flinch, didn't redden, didn't so much as shift his weight on the concrete. He simply reached into the left pocket of his coat, touched something small and smooth and metal there, the way another man might touch a coin for luck, and went on watching the crates. If you've ever been overlooked by people who never bothered to ask what you carried, type steady in the comments. Because what Colton Ashcroft did not know, standing at his podium with his clipboard and his pen and his rehearsed morning patter, was that he was about to open an auction whose entire program, whose founding plaque, whose bloodline registry going back 3 generations of working dogs, had been built on the back of a man he had just publicly mistaken for a nuisance. The dogs already knew something the county records did not. They had known it since before they were born, carried down through scent and rhythm, and the particular cadence of a command none of their handlers had ever been taught quite right. All that was left was for someone in that hall to ask the old man his name. Harlan Sowell did not offer it. Not yet. He simply stood by the crates in his canvas barn coat, gone the color of creek clay, patched at one elbow with a leather oval gone dark and shiny from years of resting against fence rails and truck doors. And he waited, the way he had waited every year before this one, for a sound only he seemed to be listening for. He wore that coat the way another man might wear a uniform he was no longer entitled to, but couldn't bring himself to retire. And under it, a flannel shirt washed so many times the plaid had gone the soft gray blue of an old photograph. His hands, when he took them out of his pockets, showed a fine tremor that steadied the instant he closed them around something solid. A fence rail, a coffee cup, the edge of a crate. In the right pocket of that coat, folded twice, was an index card gone the color of weak tea, its corners rounded soft from 11 Octobers of handling. In the left pocket, threaded onto a length of paracord gone slick and gray with age, was a leash clasp worn to a dull polish by some hand, some caller, some years he had not spoken of to anyone still living. He breathed before he moved, always,
a habit so old it had outlasted every other habit he owned. In through the nose, 4 full counts, held a beat, and out slow through the mouth. The same 4-count rhythm whether he was reaching for a coffee cup or standing in front of a crate of barking strangers' dogs. Wyatt Sowell, 10 years old, in a coat 2 sizes too big, borrowed from his father's closet, had noticed it on the drive over and asked him about it twice already that morning, and both times Harlan had only said, "Old habit," and let the boy watch him do it a 3rd time without explaining further. This was the first year Wyatt had come. For 10 years, Harlan had made this drive alone, leaving before sunrise in the truck that still smelled faintly of dog blanket and diesel, arriving at the Grange Hall before the doors opened, standing near the crates until the auction ended, and driving home again with nothing bought and nothing sold. Wyatt's mother had finally asked why, this year, she couldn't just let the boy ride along for once, and Harlan hadn't had a good enough reason to say no. He hadn't told her what he did there. He hadn't told anyone, not even Ruth, back when there had still been a Ruth to tell things to, exactly why he came back every year to a hall full of dogs that were never his and never would be. Ruth used to say a dog never forgets who taught it to trust, and neither does a man. And though she had been gone 4 years now, passed quietly in her sleep after a long, slow illness that had taken the better part of 2 winters to finish its work, he could still hear the exact register of her voice saying it. The way she'd say it while drying a coffee mug at the sink, not looking at him, like it was a fact of weather rather than a thing she'd worked out about her own husband. He took the index card out now, just to check it was still there, the way he did every year before the doors opened. He did not unfold it in front of Wyatt. He never unfolded it in front of anyone. What he wrote on the back of it each year, in the same small pencil hand, was known to exactly one person, and that person was standing in a Grange Hall in Millwood County, with a duffel bag's worth of nothing to bid on, and a boy at his elbow who was beginning, for the first time in his short life, to wonder what exactly his grandfather was doing here. "You gonna buy one this year, Grandpa?" Wyatt asked, watching a young trainer haul a black Belgian Malinois out of a crate 2 rows down, its nails scrabbling for purchase on the smooth concrete. "No," Harlan said. He put the card back in his pocket, alongside nothing else, and did not explain further. The dog down the row let out a short, sharp bark, more question than warning, and Harlan's eyes moved to it the way another man's eyes might move to a phone ringing in another room, recognizing the number before he could possibly have seen the screen. By 8:40, the hall had filled enough that the coordinator decided the morning's business could begin, and Colton Ashcroft moved to set up the handling area with the brisk, showman's energy of a man who had done this in 3 other counties and intended to make Millwoods the smoothest yet. He had a laminated agenda, a portable microphone with a persistent hum in it he'd stopped noticing weeks ago, and beside him, tablet in hand, Sloan Whitfield, the consultant the county had hired to advise on behavioral suitability assessments for the retiring dogs. A woman not yet 40 who spoke with the crisp confidence of someone who trusted her data more than her eyes. It was Sloan who first noticed Harlan standing too close to the roped-off handling square, and it was Ashcroft who said something about it into the microphone before either of them had actually asked him to move. "Folks, for insurance purposes, we do need to keep the handling area clear of, spectators," he said. And then, because the crowd was thin and restless, and he liked being the one who filled silences, he added, "Let's not have Grandpa here try to pet the exhibits. We don't need a lawsuit before lunch." And a ripple of laughter went through the folding chairs, easy and unkind in the way of laughter that costs the laughter nothing. Wyatt's ears went red. Harlan's face did not change at all. He took one step back from the rope, not because he'd been told to, exactly, but because there was no version of this morning where he needed to be closer than that yet. And something in the economy of that retreat, the lack of any protest in it, seemed to disappoint the crowd more than it satisfied them.
Sloane tapped her tablet twice and said without looking up, "We do ask that unauthorized individuals stay behind the handling line during live assessments. It's for the animal's safety as much as anyone's." She said it kindly enough, the kindness of policy rather than person, and moved on to check a chart that listed each dog by lot number rather than name. Lot 4, Lot 7, Lot 11, a shepherd whose intake sheet read only Bracken, age 9, transfer pending, in a font too small for anyone but Sloane to read from where she stood. Behind the crates, out of the coordinator's spotlight entirely, Grady Purdy moved between the kennels with a bucket of water and a soft, unhurried patience that had nothing showy in it at all. He was somewhere past 60, thick through the shoulders in the way of a man who had spent decades lifting things heavier than himself. And he talked to each dog by name as he passed, low and even, checking water levels, checking for rubbed paws, resting a broad hand flat against a crate door, until whatever animal was inside quieted enough for him to move on. He had been the county kennel's records clerk for 11 years, and its unofficial dog sitter for most of that time besides, and there was nothing in the way he worked that morning to suggest he was anything other than exactly what he appeared to be. A decent, tired man, doing right by animals nobody else in the building had bothered to learn the names of. He passed Bracken's crate twice in the first 20 minutes, and both times he lingered a beat longer than the others, murmuring something too low for Wyatt to catch, his hand resting against the door the way it had at every other crate, except that this time, when he pulled the hand away, he glanced once toward Harlan Sowell, standing behind the rope line. And something crossed his face that had nothing to do with dogs at all, and everything to do with a filing cabinet in his own garage he had not opened in 9 years. "They sure don't want you too close," Wyatt said quietly, once the laughter had died down, and the crowd's attention had drifted back to the auctioneer's opening remarks. "They don't know any better yet," Harlan said, and it wasn't bitterness in his voice, only the flat, unhurried tone of a man reading a weather report he'd seen before. He watched Bracken's crate rattle again, watched the shepherd's ears pin back at the squeal of a microphone feedback loop, and said nothing further, though his jaw set in a way Wyatt hadn't seen since his grandmother's funeral. 4 Octobers gone now, when the preacher had gotten Ruth's maiden name wrong from the pulpit, and Harlan had corrected him, once, quietly, and then let it go. By 9:15, the hall's fluorescent lights had reached the particular flat, buzzing pitch that seemed to unsettle every animal in the building at once, and the dog's distress had climbed accordingly. Pacing in tight, useless circles, one detection dog from a neighboring county flattening itself against the back of its crate every time the microphone squealed. Bracken throwing himself at the mesh door, hard enough now that the whole crate walked an inch across the concrete with each impact. A young trainer named Preston's assistant, a nervous kid barely into his 20s who'd clearly been handed the job because no one senior wanted it, tried to run the dogs through a basic obedience sequence for the crowd's benefit, calling out commands in a clipped, overconfident cadence that landed a half beat too fast, the vowels compressed, the pauses gone. Harlan watched this the way he watched everything, without moving, his breath running its 4-count rhythm beneath a face that gave away nothing. But something in the young trainer's rushed phrasing pulled at him the way a wrong note pulls at a man who has spent his whole life around music. And after the third dog failed to hold its stay and the crowd tittered again at the trainer's expense, Harlan said, quiet enough that only Grady Purdy, passing close by with his water bucket, could hear it. "He's rushing the gap between word and hand. The dogs need the count to breathe in the same order every time. He's giving it to them backward." Grady stopped mid-step. He looked at Harlan for a long moment, longer than the comment seemed to warrant, and something in his face flickered, like a man recognizing a voice on an old recording before he could place the name attached to it. "Say that again?" he asked. But at that exact moment, Ashcroft's microphone crackled to life with the morning schedule update,
and the words were lost under an announcement that the county's guest of honor would be arriving before noon to unveil the new founding plaque, and that Lot 11's transfer paperwork, already finalized, would be completed immediately following the ceremony. Grady's water bucket tipped an inch in his hand, sloshing over the rim, and he didn't seem to notice.
90 minutes, folks, Ashcroft called out, cheerful and brisk, clicking his pen twice against the podium. Let's keep things moving. Harlan's eyes went to Bracken's crate and stayed there. At 10:40, with the crowd thickened around the coffee urn, and Ashcroft midway through a joke about a dog that had once repossessed his own microphone stand, Harlan Soule stepped over the rope line without asking anyone's permission and walked the length of the crate row until he stood at its center, equidistant from all 11 dogs, and stopped. Nobody moved to pull him back. Later, when people tried to describe why, none of them could quite explain it. There had simply been something in the unhurried certainty of his walking that made even Ashcroft's hand, halfway raised toward the rope, drop back to his side. Harlan closed his eyes for one full 4-count breath. Then he said a single phrase, low, in a cadence that landed nothing like the clipped modern commands the young trainer had been using all morning. Slower. The vowels held a half-beat longer. A small rise at the end instead of a snap. The sound of a man calling something home rather than issuing an order. Every dog in the building sat. Not one after another, not in a ragged wave down the row, but together, all 11. The Malinois and the Shepherds and the small wiry detection dog from the neighboring county. And Bracken, throwing himself against his crate door one second and folding into a sit the next as if a switch somewhere behind his ribs had been thrown. The barking stopped as completely as if someone had cut a wire. For 3 full seconds, the only sound in the Grange Hall was the fluorescent lights humming overhead and someone's chair creaking as they leaned forward to see better. Ashcroft's pen, mid-click, simply stopped, his thumb frozen against the top of it. Sloane Whitfield's finger hovered an inch above her tablet screen, the assessment form she'd been filling out entirely forgotten. Near the back, a woman who had laughed loudest at the grandpa joke put a hand flat against her own chest without seeming to know she'd done it. Wyatt, still standing behind the rope line, went very still and watched his grandfather's back with an expression that had nothing to do with cold cocoa anymore. Grady Purdy set his water bucket down slowly, as if the floor might no longer be trustworthy, and did not take his eyes off Harlan Soule. "That's," Ashcroft started, and then seemed to lose the rest of the sentence somewhere behind his teeth. He looked down at his clipboard, at the lot numbers, at the neat printed founding history the county had commissioned for the morning's program, and then back up at the old man, standing among 11 silent, sitting dogs he had never trained, never met, never so much as walked past in a kennel corridor before that morning. And for the first time all day, his easy showman's patter had nothing at all to fill the space with. Nobody in that room understood yet why it had worked. That answer was still folded twice in Harlan's coat pocket, alongside an index card no one else had ever been allowed to read. And it was going to take the rest of the morning, and a box of documents sitting untouched in Grady Purdy's garage, before anyone in Millwood County understood exactly what debt they were about to be asked to pay. Sloane Whitfield recovered first, the way people trained in data tend to when the world hands them something they can't yet quantify. She reached for her tablet. That's an unusual response," she said, tapping quickly through screens, her earlier crispness returning like a life raft. "But it's not unprecedented. There's documented literature on shared foundational conditioning across working lines. If these animals share a common training lineage, a legacy command could theoretically—" She stopped, frowning at her screen, and turned it toward Ashcroft. "Actually, according to the program history we were sent, the foundational training protocol for this region was developed by a trainer named Everett Kensington, working out of a private kennel starting in 1971.
There's no Sowell listed anywhere in the founding documentation. The name meant nothing to Harlan.
He said so, flatly, without heat. Never heard of him.
That's what the official record says, Sloan said, not unkindly, turning the tablet so he could see the clean, typed paragraph, the seal of the county program office at its header. The name Everett Kensington credited as founder and first master trainer of the Millwood County Working Dog Program, established 1971. It's what the plaque says, too. It's what today's whole ceremony is built around. Grady Purdy had gone very quiet. He stood a few feet off with his water bucket forgotten at his feet, and something in his stillness had none of the easy, competent calm he'd carried all morning. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind of a man watching a door he'd nailed shut years ago start to swell against its frame.
"Grady," Harlan said, not raising his voice, "you've worked this kennel a long time. You ever hear that name before 9 years ago?" Grady's mouth opened, then closed again. "I need to check some files," he said, and it came out rougher than he meant it to, and he did not meet Harlan's eyes when he said it. And he did not go anywhere either, just stood there with his water bucket and his 11 years of careful, kind attention to animals, whose paperwork he had apparently never once questioned. Ashcroft cleared his throat, visibly working to reclaim the room. "Well, regardless," he said, clicking his pen once. "The ceremony's scheduled, the plaque's cast, and Lot 11's transfer paperwork was finalized 2 weeks ago. Mr. Kensington's people have already signed off." He said the name Kensington the way a man repeats a fact he has never once had reason to doubt, and something in the coincidence of it, Everett Kensington, the founder, some Kensington behind Bracken's transfer, seemed to pass through the crowd without quite landing anywhere yet. "Whose people?" Harlan asked. "Preston Kensington," Sloan said, checking her tablet again. "He's not bidding in person. His assistant's handling it. He's got a standing arrangement with the county for exclusive breeding rights on the retired working lines, contingent on today's transfers going through as scheduled." She looked up, and for the first time all morning, something like unease crossed her professional composure. Lot 11 specifically, the shepherd. "Bracken," Harlan said. "That's not the name on the transfer," Sloan said slowly, scrolling. "The transfer paperwork lists him as unregistered stock, no bloodline documentation on file." She looked up at Harlan and then at Grady, whose face had gone the color of old paper. "Which would mean there's no legal claim on him beyond the county's, and the county's already signed." 90 minutes, Ashcroft said again, quieter this time, checking his watch instead of the crowd, and the cheerful brightness had gone out of his voice entirely. "Noon. The colonel's already on the road." Harlan's hand went to his coat pocket, found the leash clasp there, and closed around it, and for the first time all morning, something in his 4-count breathing missed its rhythm by half a beat before it caught again. The colonel arrived at 11:06, 9 minutes after Tessa Red, the county clerk's assistant, had gone out to the gravel lot to meet the car, and the whole hall seemed to draw one collective breath when the man came through the double doors in a pressed gray suit, with a modest row of ribbons pinned above the breast pocket, moving with the unhurried authority of someone used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. His name was printed on Ashcroft's agenda as Colonel Preston, no first name given, a scheduling oversight nobody had thought worth correcting until this exact moment. He crossed the floor toward the podium with his hand already extended toward Ashcroft, and then his eyes caught on something near the crate row, and his hand simply stopped in the air, unshaken, forgotten. He was looking at Harlan's left hand, at the leash clasp threaded on its length of paracord, worn to a dull polish, resting now in the old man's open palm, where he'd drawn it out without quite meaning to. "Where did you get that?" the colonel said, and it wasn't the voice of a man beginning a ceremony. It cracked, once, clean down the middle of the word "get," and every casual thing about his posture fell away at once. "Made it myself," Harlan said. 1968. The colonel's eyes moved from the clasp to Harlan's face, slowly, like a man reading a document he already suspects he won't like. And something shifted behind them, decades sliding backward all at once. "Sergeant Soule," he said, and it wasn't a question. "You trained me on a clasp just like that one. Bracken's line, 4 generations back. I was 22 years old, and I thought I already knew everything, and you let me believe it for exactly 1 week before you proved otherwise." He said it, and then, without any apparent decision to do so, came to something close to attention, spine straight, chin level, in the middle of a Grange hall full of stacked dog crates and folding chairs. "It's an honor, Sergeant." Nobody laughed this time. Ashcroft's pen, still in his hand, simply hung there, unclicked. "You were my handler for 1 week?" Wyatt asked, from behind the rope, his voice small in the sudden hush. 6 years, the colonel said, not taking his eyes off Harlan. "He built the whole program. I've been telling that story at every promotion board I've sat since, and somewhere along the way, somebody decided the story didn't need his name attached to it anymore." Grady Purdy made a sound then, low and involuntary, and when every head in the room turned toward him, he did not try to hide behind his water bucket or his 11 years of careful competence. His shoulders sagged the way a fence post finally gives after years of leaning. "I've got the papers," he said. "The real founding file. It's been in my garage 9 years. He looked at Harlan, and his voice cracked in a different register than the colonel's had. Shame instead of recognition. "I was supposed to refile the original registration under the new program name back when the county reorganized. It was a Friday. I had 2 hours before the office closed and a stack of forms I didn't want to spend my weekend on. So I boxed the old file instead of transcribing it. Meant to get to it Monday. And then Monday came, and there was a new name already printed on all the letterhead. And I told myself it didn't matter, that a file box in a garage wasn't hurting anybody." He swallowed. 9 years, and I never once put your name next to Kensington's and thought twice about it. Until this morning, when you corrected that boy's cadence, and something in the back of my head finally sat up and paid attention. "Get the box," Harlan said, quiet, no anger in it at all. "Please." Grady nodded to Tessa Red, who was already moving toward the door before he'd finished the sentence, car keys in hand, and the hall settled into a waiting so complete that even the dogs, still sitting where Harlan's word had put them, seemed to understand that the next 40 minutes mattered more than any of the morning's scheduled business. The box came in smelling of motor oil and cardboard, its flaps softened with age, and Grady Purdy set it on the handling table himself, rather than let Tessa carry it the last few feet, as if the weight of 9 years belonged to him alone to bear that final distance. Inside were folders gone brittle at the corners, hand-drawn training diagrams in pencil, a bound logbook with a leather cover cracked like dry earth, and near the bottom, a single carbon copy adoption form, its ink faded to the soft brown of old tea. Grady lifted it out with both hands and went still, reading it twice before he spoke. "Harlan," he said, "there's a second signature on this." He turned the form around. Beside Harlan's own looping signature at the bottom, in a smaller, rounder hand, was another name. Ruth Soule, co-signing witness. And beneath it, a dozen more forms in the same box, spanning years, each one carrying that same paired signature, Harlan's and Ruth's together. Every dog he had ever placed with a family, or a department, quietly witnessed and vouched for by a woman whose name had never once appeared on any official program document. Not because she hadn't earned it, but because neither of them had ever thought to ask for it. Harlan's hand, holding the form, went still in a way that had nothing to do with tremor. Ruth used to say, a dog never forgets who taught it to trust. And neither does a man. And he understood now, standing in that hall with her handwriting under his thumb, that she had meant it as more than a saying, that she had been standing beside him in every one of these placements the whole time, quietly making sure the trust held. And he had simply never had the box in front of him to prove it. "She never told me she signed these," he said. And his voice, for the first time all morning, was not entirely steady. The colonel, watching, said nothing, understanding enough to leave the silence alone. It was Ashcroft who finally moved, setting his clipboard down on the table beside the open box, and when he spoke, his voice had none of its morning brightness left in it at all. "Mr. Soule," he said, "I read a script this morning that had another man's name in it as the reason any of these dogs exist. I stood up there and said it like I knew it was true." He looked down at the crate row, at 11 dogs still sitting in a silence they had chosen for themselves, and then back at Harlan. "What do you want to happen now?" "I don't want a plaque with my name on it instead of his," Harlan said. "I want it to say what's true, and I want Bracken staying with a working family, not going into some breeding operation 2 counties over that never signed a single one of these forms." He nodded toward the box. "That's all I came for." Ashcroft nodded, slowly, and then, because something in the morning had genuinely rearranged itself behind his eyes, he asked, quieter than anything he'd said all day, "Would you show me the cadence, the real one? I want to teach it right from now on." Harlan looked at him for a long moment, the way he'd looked at the crates that morning, patient and unhurried. And then he said, "4 counts in, not 3. Let the word land soft at the end, not sharp. The dog's not obeying you. It's answering you." He said it once, plainly, the way he'd have said it to any handler worth teaching. And Ashcroft repeated the phrase back to him twice, getting the rhythm wrong the first time and closer the second. And Harlan nodded, and that was the whole of the correction. No ceremony in it at all, just one old man passing a rhythm forward to a younger one, who had finally decided to listen. The county struck the original plaque order that same afternoon, before the engraver had so much as cut the first letter, and Preston Kensington's standing offer for exclusive breeding rights was withdrawn from the county's docket within the week, once Grady Purdy's box of founding papers made its way, photocopied and properly filed at last, into the permanent record under the name it had always belonged to. Bracken's transfer paperwork was voided on a Tuesday, and by that Thursday, the old shepherd was riding in the passenger seat of Harlan Sowell's truck, head out the window into county air that smelled of cut hay instead of kennel disinfectant, going home to a place that had been waiting for him for 11 years, without either of them quite knowing it. Weeks later, with the first cold snap of autumn settling over Millwood County, Harlan sat on his porch step at dusk, the sky gone the deep bruised orange that comes right before true dark, and worked the leash clasp free from its length of paracord for the last time. He threaded it onto a new collar instead, plain leather, sized to a shepherd gone gray at the muzzle, and fastened it there with hands that did not tremble at all while they had a purpose to hold. Bracken's head came to rest heavy and warm against his knee, the way it seemed to know to do without being taught, and Harlan let one hand settle against the dog's shoulder, not checking for anything in particular anymore, just resting there. Wyatt sat 2 steps down, tossing a stick for a dog too content to chase it, and asked, not for the first time that week, what the index card said, the one Harlan still carried folded in his coat. 11 years of the same 3 words, Harlan said, brought him home. He took the old length of paracord, worn soft and gray, and hung it on a nail by the door where it would stay. Retired now, the way a man retires a tool that has finally finished its one long job. The porch light came on behind him, catching the edge of the new collar, and somewhere down the hill, a dog barked once at nothing at all and went quiet again on its own. Some debts take 11 years and one old man's patience to finally come due. And this one had at last. And it left nothing behind but a dog's head heavy against an old man's knee, and a boy learning, without being told, exactly what his grandfather had spent a lifetime being quiet about.